Hey folks, welcome. This is the third video about discussions about contemporary classical music, and in this video I want to keep talking about some of the issues that I brought up in the last videos, and also address some of the criticisms that I've received both in YouTube comments but also on Facebook groups. A lot of the criticism that I receive for posting these videos comes from the idea that criticizing contemporary classical music is equivalent to promoting the commercialization of contemporary classical music, or pushing a kitsch sort of influence into this genre. Sort of like a reductionist idea of either you are with the contemporary classical music crowd, who are for purity and non-compromising with and not compromising with the market, or you are a part of the problem. I strongly disagree with this approach of considering contemporary classical music sort of like a pure form of art that has to be preserved from the malicious influences of the market. I think there is space for constructive criticism and critical thinking about what contemporary classical music is for and what has produced over the last 50 years, for example. And what I'm trying to do in these videos is to raise these issues so that young composers can think about this more openly without being afraid of being labeled as peddlers of bad music, in a way. So, for instance, one thing that I did in the last week was asking a question on Facebook groups that are concerned with contemporary classical music. And my question was whether or not there is a masterpiece of contemporary classical music in the last 50 years. And I defined a masterpiece as a composition that has had a broad cultural impact, so outside of contemporary classical music or the classical music scene, and also that will be performed in the next 50 years, for example. I realize these are arbitrary parameters, but I think we need to be able to evaluate what contemporary music is doing, not just within its walls, but also outside of them, and have some sort of assessment of the quality of the music that is being produced in the last period, especially if we compare it to earlier periods, such as, for instance, the first half of the 20th century. And in fact, when I thought about this idea of a masterpiece, one piece that I think is undoubtedly to be labeled as a masterpiece is the Rite of Spring of Stravinsky. So that's a piece that has had a broad impact on the culture, that has really changed the discourse, not only in music, but in art, in the arts in general. And also that has been lasting for over a century. We still very much are very familiar with it, and we still consider it a great piece of music. So that's a parameter that we can use. That's a term of comparison that we can use to evaluate contemporary classical music today. So do we have a rite of spring of contemporary classical music? I think there is a strong case to be made that the contemporary classical music that has had the broadest impact on the culture is minimalism. Pieces by Philip Glass, Steve Reich, John Adams, which is, I guess, not strictly a minimalist, can be definitely be appreciated outside of the circle of contemporary classical music, and are known somewhat outside of it. So I consider minimalism as a reaction to new music, to contemporary classical music, rather than being a real representation, an example of it. So in fact, minimalism, despite the fact that it has had the broadest cultural impact, and it's the most popular of the classical genre in today's culture, it is also the genre that I notice is taught the least in musical institution. Another popular answer was Ligeti. And Ligeti is, I think, a very interesting case. His music has been listened to by a lot of people outside of contemporary classical music, especially thanks to Stanley Kubrick, who used Ligeti's music both in 2001: Space Odyssey, but also in Eyes Wide Shut, I think. And in general, Ligeti is really a peculiar case in contemporary classical music, and really cross boundaries. So I would agree also that Ligeti is probably someone who will be performed decades from now, and who has already been listened by a broader audience. The production of the last 50 years in contemporary classical music is still somewhat limited, I would say, compared to pretty much all other periods of music production, of music going back all the way to the Baroque era. One reason why the output of contemporary classical music might have changed in the last period is that now we have shifted from a system of patronage that was more characteristic of the 19th century to a institutional system where contemporary classical music is composed and produced within institutions. The institutions are to be considered as bureaucracies. So a musical institution is a bureaucracy at the bottom. And so they will follow the instincts and procedures that bureaucracies tend to abide to. And one thing that bureaucracies do is try to avoid accountability for their process and their output. One way to avoid accountability for a bureaucracy is to shift the assessment of its output from an outside place to a place within itself, or a place where that is strictly connected to itself. So if the institution, the musical institution, is not only the place where contemporary classical music is produced, but also the place where contemporary classical music is judged, then this goal will be accomplished, because the contemporary classical music will only be judged by people that are within the institutions. And these people will have an incentive to approve of the working of the musical institutions, because they are part of it. If the institution is both in charge of producing an output, but and also to judge it and to assess how good that output is, then the bureaucracy and the institution will have successfully avoided any accountability. I think this is not the only problem with contemporary classical music, but it's one of them. The genre has become less able to produce masterpieces or pieces of music that have broad impact, that talk to humanity as a whole. And this is not because a matter of purity, of avoid commodification of music, even though that's the usually the explanation for why contemporary classical music is so detached, but rather is, I think, it's an instinct that institutions have to really try to shift the evaluation onto themselves. The idea of this music being very hard to digest for anyone outside of the circle of contemporary classical music is an important trait that allows the music institution, the bureaucracy, not to be accounted for by outside observers. I hope you will stay tuned for more of these videos, and let me know what you think in the comments. And until the next time, take care.